Italy? Whiskey? Ah, Italy beer! You could never unlock my secret. Oh no! Suddenly, hello, Libby! Let's begin. Indeed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is the Fireside Chat, where we speak with interesting guests who have perhaps like some philosophical, parallels to our own, since we like to talk about men's issues. On today's show, I'm speaking with one of our friends on Twitter, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. Phil Mitchell, who works with sexually abused men and boys. And he's been, we find ourselves essentially in the same circles, in terms of like commenting on each other's posts and so on. So Phil Mitchell has you have a website. I put it in the description so people can go check it out. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to see you in person.
Yeah. So, one thing I've noticed is that, like, the conversation around male victims of abuse, whether they're boys or men, and all kinds of abuses, from financial abuse to physical abuse, sexual abuse. I've noticed that conversation is opening up more and more. Like I'm pretty optimistic generally, and it looks like this is something that is sort of like an idea that I would have thought would have maybe never received mainstream attention. Or a problem that would never have gotten mainstream attention is getting it now. So, firstly, have you also noticed that? And how long have you been doing this for?
So yes, I have noticed that. I think I sometimes share your optimism. I have to be honest and say sometimes I feel hard to be optimistic sometimes, depending on what I'm seeing. So there's a bit of a more balance for me, but I do take your point. How long have I been doing this for? So I've been working with abused boys and men in various settings, experiencing various use for, it'll be 18 years this September. So I've been doing that together, as a volunteer, as a therapist, as a therapeutic worker, as someone working in the voluntary sector, working with abused boys in private practice. So an amalgamation, if you like, but it's been 18 years this September. And whilst a lot of my work historically and today, I guess, has been about supporting boys and men who experience sexual abuse as children, adults, or both, I found that has just sort of naturally, if you like, linked into working with boys and men who've experienced other types of abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, domestic abuse, false allegations, paternity fraud, lots of different things as well. And that's not something I made a conscious effort to set out to do. My conscious focus was working with boys and men affected by various forms of sexual abuse, but it's kind of got bigger. So that's, I guess, my background, if you like.
Yeah. And I noticed that all the things you listed off, and there's plenty of others as well, they do seem to be something that, like, if you talk to a man who is experiencing abuse of some kind, and then you dig into that man's story to figure out like what the depth of whatever the abuse is, you find that there are other issues that are also men's issues, or at least like predominantly male oriented issues. So things like false allegations, things like you mentioned paternity fraud, ways that women can exploit the sort of child support and divorce courts and so on to hurt men. And it turns out that like a lot of the stuff that men are experiencing are products of other issues that men experience. And it's almost like the whole thing is kind of connected. So if you wanted to just focus on one thing, you couldn't, because there's other facets, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's complex. I think that's the word I often use a lot. Complex and context. Yeah, it is often very complicated. There's loads of intrusive thoughts. There's lots of cognitive distortions. There's sort of irrational beliefs. So yeah, absolutely. You know, I think the one of the comments that I used to get a lot, not so much recently, was, Phil, how can you work with a man who says he's been a victim of domestic abuse perpetrated by his partner, male or female, and at the same time is alleging he is being falsely accused? They should be totally separate. But I've like, why should they be totally separate? What's the thinking behind that? And also, sometimes you can't separate them. There are guys that I've worked with and am working with where they have been and are being abused in lots of ways. But I think the narrative is sometimes that, well, the false allegation, that's separate. Well, why is it? It might be that actually the false allegation is just quite simply another form of abuse that they're experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. That is, I mean, but that's the thing. Like, when we think of abuse, and I think this is the reason why people do this, when we think of abuse, we just think of just a direct physical abuse of one partner to the other partner, right? They're just hitting them or whatever it is, right? But that's not the way that a lot of people who are abusive will act that out. They'll use, whatever they think is going to cause the most pain, which might not be physical. It might be, like you said, financial, emotional, whatever. So yeah, I don't think you can separate those things.
Absolutely. And I think, who gets to decide what the most severe form of abuse is? Now, I'm sure we can all agree that, any abuse that leads to murder, homicide, the death of someone is horrific and it's terrible. And that is arguably perhaps the worst form of abuse because their life is ended. And at the same time, where you have people, regardless of sex, gender, whatever, what you have is you have two people in a relationship. If we talk about domestic abuse, there are people who will say, well, the worst form of abuse is the physical violence, the broken bones, the bruises, the cuts. That is the worst. That physical harm is the worst form of abuse. And for some people, it absolutely is. For others, it's not. And I have worked with numerous men and boys who have said words to the effect of, I'd rather that she kept punching me in the face than go around telling people I've done things to her when I haven't. And it was that the bruises heal, the cuts will heal, a broken bone will mend, but it takes a lot longer for people to start to see through the lies that she's telling about me. And so I think ultimately, if a man, for example, is saying, for me, do you know what? The lies that she spread about me hurt more and caused me more damage than a punch in the face. I don't think that any of us have got the right to say, no, you are wrong. It's the physical pain that is worse. It's like, maybe for you, yeah, but not for everyone. It's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for 18 years. So is there like a story behind what got you started down that road?
Well, there's a few really. So when I was in school as a teenager, I was being bullied because I was gay. There was lots of violence. There was lots of sort of name calling, lots of horrible stuff. And that led to poor mental health, lots of issues affecting me. I saw a counsellor and that made me think, maybe I want to get into this. So I looked into it and I did. What I found, just again, sort of just how it happened really, I ended up working with a number of men who had been abused by their partner, who'd experienced abuse as children. There was lots of different abuse, and I kind of realized, why am I seeing all these guys that were being abused? And it just so happened that way, and that's kind of really what got me interested in it. I guess along with that, my own experience contributed to it. So at kind of 16, I was sexually exploited by a man who kind of pressured me, forced me, manipulated me, groomed me into doing things with 4 other men. And then about 4 or 5 years later, I was raped in the centre of Leeds by a guy who I believe, I don't know if he was, but I believe to be a bouncer. And so those experiences as well, being a man, that kind of prompted me to think I want to do more about highlighting abuse, working with more male victims, and how do I get into that? And that was a part of it as well. But another influence was when I was working in the voluntary sector. So I was coordinating a service that worked with boys and young men who were being or were assessed as being I'll say that again, tongue-tied there. I was working with boys and young men who had been sexually exploited or who were assessed as being at risk of being sexually exploited. And through that work, it became absolutely abundantly clear that boys and men, abused boys and men, were getting the raw end of the deal. And and I'm going back now way over 10 years ago. And sometimes people say to me, yeah, but Phil, if we talk about boys in particular who have been sexually abused or exploited, you know, what was it like in 2009 compared to now? Well, the word I would use is different, but I think there are pockets of improvement, but there are also pockets where it's got worse. So here in the UK, for example, in 2009, we had the government's guidance on tackling child sexual exploitation. And it did, in my opinion, an okay job of tackling the issue of boys and men. It said, let's not forget boys and men. What are the issues that affect boys and young men? Why don't they disclose what's going on? And so it was like, oh, okay, they've made an effort here to shine a light on boys and young men. Now, fast forward over 10 years later, you look at the current guidance on working with sexually exploited children or sexually abused children, young people. Boys and young men as victims are hardly focused on. It doesn't talk about the differences. It doesn't talk about the lack of disclosure, the lack of support. It just doesn't. And if anything, when it does focus on boys and men, it tends to focus on more as perpetrators and victims. So I think we've kind of, 10 years ago to now, what we're doing is that victim spotlight has gone really dim, but the perpetrator spotlight has gone extremely bright. And another example of that is here in the UK, we have the violence against women and girls strategy. We don't have a parallel strategy for boys and men, despite the fact that data from the Office of National Statistics shows that the vast majority of victims of violent crimes on the street, so on and so on, are men. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have anything for girls and women. It's saying if we're doing something for girls and women who are the minority of victims, why are we not doing anything for boys and men who are the majority of victims? And you often get lots of misandrists and man haters coming at this point. Yes, but who's harming these men? It's other men, isn't it? So they're still victims. It doesn't matter. And so I think what we've done now, years ago when I was first seeing how it was blatantly obvious boys and men were getting a real raw deal. Fast forward, it's just got worse, not better. Now, coming back to your point about how, let's, is there a bit of positivity here? Yes, there is. There are pockets of positivity. You do hear some examples in the news, in the media of men who have won battles in court, men who have kind of overcome their abuse. The Johnny Depp case, it also is an interesting one. And that is positive. But I think ultimately there's always someone there ready to minimize that, have a go at that, kind of use it to deflect from male victimhood to male perpetration.
Yes, absolutely. It's I think it might be something that is a human problem that we struggle with, because we need to be able to see men as a disposable resource to some degree, because they, they're out there and they're doing the most dangerous jobs and they're fighting in the wars and, all of that. And so in a way, it's in our DNA to distance ourselves a little bit from male suffering, because if we become too concerned with it, then it's going to limit, our ability to continue to grow. And it's also, men don't even want that. Like they like being able to, be on what I describe as the perimeter of our society, like doing the important stuff. But that also means that they're going to, be the ones that might die or what have you. So I think that we have this tendency to do that, but I don't think that it's necessary that we do it to the degree that we do. And I think that is that's what the problem is. It seems like we have become so insensitive to male suffering, firstly, we don't even take it very seriously when boys suffer. So that's sort of a sign, because as boys, they need as children, males need our protection and our provision. So I think that one of the ways that people cope with this reality is they do exactly what you said. They blame men for male suffering. And so that, it reminds me of this clip from the Joe Rogan podcast, where I forget who Joe Rogan was talking with, but they were talking about men's issues, and Joe Rogan was making a joke. It wasn't a very good joke, but I think it's because he didn't really think it through. But he thinks it's great, right? He says, these men's rights guys, they come up to me and they say that, men get raped more than women. And then he's like, what are you talking about, right? Because, he thinks it's just a ludicrous thing to say. And they're like, well, if you count prison rape, men are raped more than women. And he says, yeah, but they're raped by other men. So when he believes that by saying that, he's canceling out any suffering, right? And it's weird because we're not supposed to celebrate rape anyway. Like, we're not supposed to see it as a good thing regardless. And I don't even think it's, and maybe I'm a little, maybe I'm a little on the outside here, but I don't think a guy getting raped in prison is good, because I don't think that all people in prison deserve to be raped. In fact, I don't think any of them do. Even if they were rapists, like we already have a punishment. It's called prison. So, but like this sort of defense, it's an automatic thing. I wouldn't say that someone like Rogan is like a misandrist. I think that he's just going along with a kind of mainstream, narrative about men, and he's not questioning it. He's not even asking himself, well, actually, that if some guy goes to prison for tax evasion, does he deserve to be raped? Like, he doesn't ask that. So just something I've noticed. It's sort of, and I don't think it's great, but I do notice that there is a lot of like, it's cope. It's people trying to like cope with the fact that there's so much misandry. It's so common, right? It's just like, we don't even think about it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on all that, but
well, I think there's a few things there. So I think your first point, if we give the royal we, society, government, the media, if we give boys and men the message that we do care about them, then that surely can only do more good than bad. And if some men, not all, I don't want to generalize too much, but if some men say, I want to provide, I want to protect, I want to be sort of a good man, I want to look after my family, I want to be strong, I want to contribute, I want to, well, fine, no wrong with that. If that's what you want and that's your choice, you are more likely to do that and function effectively if you are kind of from a good, healthy mindset, physically, emotionally, and mentally. You're more likely to get in that place, actually, if you are being told messages, you matter, we care about you, thank you for your contribution, we value this and all that, rather than this overwhelming ball of hate that is kind of thrown at men from the what you might call the mild end on social media to the vast number of people typing, chanting, justifying and celebrating kill all men, to the other end, which we generally tend to not talk about, which is how the man-hating attitude and the misandry influences behavior that physically and in other ways harms men. And it's really interesting. I spoke to I was in touch with a police. I don't know if this person was an ex-police officer or current, or I can't remember. Anyway, this person's worked in the police for quite a while. And he said to me that whenever we, certainly in recent years, whenever we were called to an incident of, a man suspected to have hurt a woman, we would have to ask questions that would gather information that suggests, has this incident been influenced by misogyny? Yeah. Whereas when we were called to an incident where it looked very likely, or in some cases without a doubt, that the woman has harmed the man, we were never told to ask questions about misandry. And I think so we're already setting something up there which is deeply problematic. And I think if what we're saying is, well, if somebody's hateful attitude or judgmental attitude, prejudiced attitude, whatever your word you want to use, about someone's sex or gender is influencing the harm, then are we kind of saying, well, we should only be asking those questions when it's a man influenced by hatred of women rather than women influenced by hatred of men, or men influenced by hatred of men and women influenced by hatred of women as well? So I think there's all of that. So there's the double standard there. But your point on misandry, you get lots of people just saying it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And one of the best things someone said to me once, well, Phil, look in the dictionary, the word unicorn is there. Unicorns don't exist. No, but the definition of unicorn is that it's a mythical creature. And ultimately what you have is misandry is an attitude. That's the thing. It is an attitude. It is the hate, contempt, dislike of men because they're men. And whether that goes from something mild, such as I've said something horrible online about all men and I think men should tolerate it because they're men, to the other end where it's the case of, well, yeah, if you hurt me because you are, sorry, if my feelings are hurt because you're an hour late from work because you were in the pub with the guys, and I think it's okay to slap you or hit you or punch you, and I think it's okay to do that because you're a man, misandry, it's on a spectrum, just like misogyny is. But what we do is we shine the spotlight on misogyny, and in some cases, not all, in some cases, see it when it's not there, assume it when it's not there. Okay, I'm not saying that's the case in every case, but when it comes to misandry, it's like, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist at all. Or you've got the others that go, yes, it does exist, and I'm proud to be a misandrist. So you've got, again, different extremes. We can't argue about it existing because it does exist. We can perhaps argue about how it exists and how it influences behavior, but to say it does not exist is simply factually incorrect.
Yeah, exactly. And that statement about like what you said about how sometimes we find misogyny where it doesn't exist, that's absolutely true as well, because it's because we're so sensitive to misogyny. Like, we find that it's probably one of the worst things you could ever be as a misogynist. Like, it's probably, I would say that it's presented as the worst kind of person is a person who criticizes women. And, like, you don't even have to hate them, right? And I think we're overly sensitive to misogyny, and we are, like, probably way too like insensitive, I guess, to misandry or misandry.
Yeah.
So you talk openly about misandry, and yet you work with you work with men, you work in these sort of sociological spaces. I would imagine that the concept of misandry with your peers or maybe people that you work with, is that like difficult for them? Like, do you end up like having to defend the concept of misandry in your practice?
I mean, it depends on who I'm speaking to. So, like I said, most of the people I work with are boys and men. I work with a number of girls and women too, who've also experienced different types of abuse. But the most of the people I work with are boys and men. I think sometimes with the people I'm working with who experienced abuse, the word misandry doesn't even have to come up. It doesn't come up, but it's pretty obvious through the discussions that is sometimes present. Sometimes it's useful to name it and explore it. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the guy that I'm working with will go, "That's misandry, isn't it?" What's very interesting is that a number of boys and men have said they know what misogyny is, but they've never heard of misandry. Mm-hmm. And they think it makes sense that a word of the opposite would exist, but why have they never heard of it? Well, we can talk about why all day. Sometimes other people I work with or maybe not work with, but are in the same field as me. Yes, they have, no, misandry doesn't exist. And I think what's really interesting is, I think, I've got to the point now where I'm turning to a bit of a miserable, boring old man who just wants to some degree, avoid certain conflict. You have to pick your battles very carefully, or not at all sometimes. And so there's got to be a bit of thought there. But yeah, there are those in the industry working with victims of abuse that get very defensive when we talk about male victims, that get extremely defensive when we talk about misandry. It's almost as if there's this personal attack on them. And it's just there, we can assume, and I do it as well. I hold my hands up. Sometimes I assume and think, is that comment fueled by misandry? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Don't know. It could be, it might not be. Other comments are blatantly fueled by misandry because of the nature of the comment. But yes, there are colleagues, shall we say, and other professionals such as myself in the field where they just can't get their head around misandry. And the ones that the comments that I've seen are, it doesn't exist and here's why. And the evidence that they present to say, here is the proof that misandry doesn't exist, is basically a list of examples of certain behaviors that they assume, and in some places, in my opinion, correctly assume, that those behaviors are fueled by misogyny. And so, look, here are all the examples of misogyny. Here are all the examples of how girls and women across the world are disadvantaged. And much of this data, I don't say all of it, but much of this data is valid and it makes sense. None of that, not one single iota of that, proves misandry doesn't exist.
Yeah.
At all. If anything, it says, well, yeah, that proves that this exists towards girls and women. It doesn't prove that this does not exist for boys and men. We might be saying that misogyny and misandry, there are ways in which it is displayed in a similar way, but there are also ways which it might be displayed differently, and other different aspects of both come on, yeah, and so on, and then we have to see how that influences it. So it's a case of that doesn't prove, you know, sometimes I have discussions with people going, what you're saying is all valid in terms of the point, but what you're trying to prove, misandry doesn't exist. The information you've put across does not prove misandry does not exist. What it might prove is that misandry exists differently, perhaps, to misogyny. That's not proof it doesn't exist at all.
Yeah.
It could be argued, perhaps, the very fact that people trying to say, look at all these issues affecting boys and men and how some are or may be influenced by misandry, look at that, saying, no, that doesn't exist, dismiss that, ignore it, get rid of it, minimize it, and now let's just focus on how women are. Perhaps that in itself is an example of misandry.
That's what I was thinking. You know, it's weird because it does get treated like a zero-sum game. Like we can't simply accept that, you know, men have problems and they have needs, and women have problems and they have needs, and we just. But it seems like there's a really strong resistance to this idea that, you know, that misandry exists, and yeah. I think it is in its own way. It is proof of misandry because. I mean, like, what else could you call it? It's like, well, if a man needs help and we're offering him help, how are women losing? Because that's kind of the attitude, right? It's like, oh, you can't give this energy to men because it might harm women. How? Like, you know, and like, you know, I meant to ask you this. There in the United States, we have thousands of shelters for women, and just about every church. And, you know, so many other, like, institutions, right? We have one shelter for men, in the whole country. And it's the only one also, by the way, that isn't, like, a feminist, you know, institution, which is, like, what it needs to be. Because I think, and I don't know what you think about feminism, but I believe that feminism is built on misandry, and so... It doesn't service men in general. It blames men for their own problems. It's built into it because the idea is that, you know, it's trying to maintain this very mainstream idea that you know, men have historically oppressed and hated women for most of history, and that is essentially designed to make men less sympathetic in general. So if you open a shelter or some kind of like program and you focus on men's issues, but it's run by feminists, they're just going to blame men for their problems. So it doesn't actually address it because ideologically it's impossible. So we only have one shelter that is, it's like, I think it's the National Coalition for Men has like one shelter, and of course they're not making a lot of headway. But I was wondering in the UK, so because I think that in some ways things are worse there, and part of the reason for it is that I've seen some of the weird like anti-sexual harassment laws that have been passed, you know, in Nottinghamshire and I believe it was also in London. I could be wrong about that. And they're using the Sarah Everard tragedy as like the pretext so they can say, oh, we're gonna, and this is things like, staring at women. Like it's just stuff that you can't quantify, right? Staring at women, harassing women. Well, I don't know what harassment means. Like if you approach a woman and say hello, it's essentially just designed to sort of keep men from interacting with women in public. So, what I was going to get at is, first of all, what's the landscape look like for male support in the UK? But also, like, what are your thoughts on those laws? I guess. So,
yeah, I'm not sure if they're laws, but I think I see your point. But there have been a number of campaigns, which, as you've said, yes, there was one in Nottingham, there's one in London about, this is sexual harassment, do not stare. I think the problem that I have is a lot of them will say, male violence starts with words. Now, there's so much to unpick from that. So first of all, why male? If you take male out of that, campaign man looking very angry, nice poster, nice shiny gloss and all that, and it says male violence starts with words. Okay, well, first of all, how do we know that? What are we saying? Because what I take from that is actual physical violence, words come first. Now, that might be true, it might not be true. I would imagine in some cases it probably is, okay? But why is it the case? Why are we focusing on male violence? If you were to remove the word male and put any other demographic there in its place, there would be outrage. And what that shows to me is we are living in a society where it's okay to basically metaphorically hit and kick, beat men because they are men. It's absolutely fine. And the justification, which is poor in my view, is, well, that's because men do most of the harm. Well, hang on a minute. So they said murder, domestic abuse, violence. Now, if depending on which data source you go to, Office of National Statistics, for example, yes, most perpetrators of murder and violence generally are men. That is true. When it comes to domestic abuse, that's a little bit different, because even though the ONS might say, yes, most perpetrators are men, there's a wealth, and I mean a wealth of research out there that collectively say, well, actually, some research says that men and women perpetrate violence in relationships at equal rates. And why are we not talking about that? And what's that about? And what we do is we often rely just on what the ONS tell us. And it's like, well, yeah, we should look at that, but let's not rely on that to tell us the entire picture. There are other sources we should also be looking at. But I think it's that male violence is the worst violence. Says who? Says who? And what are we talking about here? And what we generally tend to do, in my experience, is extreme harm that physically harms and kills, murder, domestic abuse, violence in the street, all of that. We look at that and we focus on that, and perhaps that's right to do so. But then what we don't do is other forms of harm, paternity fraud, false allegations, reputation damage, all of that. We don't look at that. And there's the belief saying, yeah, well, that's not as bad as the other forms of harm. Well, I'm pretty sure I can think of many, many, many men that would say, whoa, I've been severely affected. I know someone who took their own life. I tried to take my own life. I lost my family, my life, my job, my livelihood, my entire life changed because of the paternity fraud, because of these false allegations and all of that sort of stuff. And so I think what we're kind of saying is, because there is no physical harm perpetrated against those affected by paternity fraud and false allegations, it's not that bad. It hardly happens. Sadly, maybe we could controversially say that most of the perpetrators of those crimes are women. So actually, no. We live in a world where we have to victimize the women and put the men in the perpetrator category. So there's this whole ideology behind it that really kind of doesn't help. And in a world where we're meant to be promoting equality, personally, I think we should be focusing on either female perpetrated violence and male perpetrated violence, or violence.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of just one or the other, because it's you either want equality or you want special treatment. Which is it? And I think that's the thing. And the blunt reality, and this is the blunt reality, is there are people out there that have challenged me on this. Most men, nearly all men on the planet, are not murderers.
Yeah, that's wild.
Not. In fact, you would.
I don't believe you.
I know it's crazy, isn't it? I'm talking
Yeah.
crazy. There are more men are against murder, would stop murder, would rush to prevent, and all of that. Yes, there are some men that murder, and it's terrible and it's horrible, and of course they sort of need dealing with, and so on. Out of the people that murder, the vast majority of the murder that men murder, they murder other men than women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, whilst the Sarah Everard case was without a shadow of a doubt horrific, tragic, just absolutely awful, and there's no other. Of course, it was. It's completely inappropriate to use that to demonize the entire demographic of men.
Yes.
And it's not just hateful, it is absolutely irrational. There is no sense behind it, because I can't remember the data off the top of my head, but less than 1% of men in England and Wales, I think it's a fraction of a percentage of men have committed murder. And of the ones that have, they've murdered other men rather than women.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just does not make any sense to demonize the entire men. And what's really interesting, because I think of how the media have spun this, I've certainly had comments made to me saying, well, that most people who are killed on the streets are women. Most people who are killed on the streets are women, and most people that kill women on the streets are men. So no, sorry, most people statistically killed on the streets are not women. Yes, there are women being killed on the streets. It's horrible. It's terrible. Of course, it needs dealing with. But it is incorrect if we look at data that says most people killed on the streets. But people believe that because of what they've seen in the news and the media. And it's this whole exaggerated, over-the-top hysteria, which just doesn't help. And then you end up with people thinking things that are absolutely not correct, then also thinking I'm justified in my hatred of men.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with, like, when a woman is killed, everyone pays attention. Everyone notices, everyone grieves, When a man is killed, it's hardly even reported on. Because, I don't know, it just doesn't have the same or at least the assumption is that it won't have the same emotional impact. So there's no point. Like in Chicago, again, where I'm from, men are killed every weekend by gang violence, and it never gets reported on. So it's just too many, but also like I guess it's so frequent that they might just tell you, well, this is how many people were shot this weekend or killed this weekend or whatever. And for the media, it's not about like, is this an important story to share, because maybe then we can like try to observe some patterns that are causing these things so that we could try to figure out what needs to be done to minimize, these incidents, because we don't want young men, and it is young men, being shot and killed in the streets. And so, but that would require the media to be honest when if in the same city, if a girl is, found in somebody's basement and she was like sex trafficked or something, which is also terrible, but it'll become like a nationwide story everyone will talk about. So it's not like there won't be an outpouring of sympathy. And I think that this is why I think this is ironic, because we don't talk about, like, it's, like you said, that there are men who are antisocial, they have low impulse control, they're prone to violence, and they're very rare, which is shocking, right? Because you would think with the way that we treat men today that it's a miracle that it's so few that act out. But you have this kind of behavior, and no one is asking the question, like, where does this come from? How does this man end up this way, right? Mm-hmm. And it's obviously like not a new conversation that I think that we used to talk about this stuff. We used to talk about like what causes, youth delinquency and gang violence and so on. And, I think that it's just one of these things that we're not supposed to talk about. So because of that, there is like a kind of like cycle of violence. It's a generational cycle of violence. So, and those are the people that I think, you know, like we need to be looking at and talking about honestly, because this is another thing too. Like, you know, we may find, and I have like a theory that I don't think it's really that, you know, shocking, but I believe it has something to do with home life and abuse that you may have experienced as a child, you know, and the family unit and what's happened to it and so on. And I think that those are the things that do this. And I think that it's one of these things that a lot of people don't want to talk about because they don't actually want the problem solved. They, you know, like because if you continue to raise broken men, young men, and they continue to like contribute to this cycle where they don't know their father, they go and they join a street gang, they try to learn about masculinity through a bunch of other people who don't have their fathers either. So they're basically trying to figure this or navigate this you know, this new world that they're entering as young men. No one knows what it really means. No one knows what a healthy man looks like. They engage in you know, gang violence, but they also have a lot of mental health issues, like they're depressed and they've been abused as children, and you know, they may get addicted to drugs or alcohol or something else, you know, and they act out. You know, they have no impulse control. They're not stoic. They're very emotional, and they end up behaving in a destructive way. And then you know, like basically the sociologists or whatever can just point to that and say, you see, that's toxic masculinity, and that's what they'll say, which of course solves no problems. It just allows them to point to something and then say this is what men are, even though it clearly isn't, because you know, a well-raised, loved, supported young man can basically do amazing things, right? But we take that away from them, and we do it as early as, I mean, I don't know how you feel about circumcision, but it could start as early as that, because circumcision can be traumatic for a child. So but yeah, I mean, this is the thing that I think it continuously feeds into itself because of what we neglect. And a lot of it I think has to do with, again, our inability to just say, you know, what are families doing to contribute to this? What are the dangers of being born in a home without a father present? What does that lead to? Because you know, in America, 95+% of all prison inmates don't know their father. So is that an important statistic? I would guess it is, you know, like I think that's kind of important. So anyway, and those are just my thoughts on that.
I think first of all, you mentioned about sort of crime and gang crime and all of that. So, you know, sort of over here in England, we there was something that came out a few months ago. It was early the year where they were saying something about how there'd been I don't know if the word significant was used. I might be wrong. And if anyone who's listening, don't quote me too much on that. But they said there had been a rise in knife crime, and they were saying that of all the you know, the number of people who had been killed on the streets via knife crime, it was this number a year ago, and it's increased a year later. I can't remember the exact figures. Now, a lot of the newspapers that had reported on this increase, not all of them, but a lot of them did it in a very generic way. And they said, rise in teenagers victims of knife crime. Now, when you read the article in details, every single one of those teenagers was male. Every single one of them. And it is my belief that if every single one of those teenagers had been female, that would have been mentioned in the headline. We'd have focused, and I think that's what we do when we look at the kind of suffering of boys and men, whether it's mild to severe. There are examples of how we totally take gender out of it. But actually, when it's the suffering of girls and women, we absolutely focus on gender. But it's the same way around when we look at perpetration. Harm perpetrated by boys and men, we focus massively on their gender. But when it's perpetration by girls and women, we rarely, in my experience, focus on the gender. And so there's something there. Why are we not saying that it was these boys and young men that were victims of knife crime? Why are we excluding their gender but including it in other ways? What's that all about? So there is something there that I think, raised some questions. Masculinity is an interesting one. So I'm ashamed to say this, but a few years ago, I was one of the not loudest voices, but I was very much in favor of, toxic masculinity, it's bad, it's terrible, isn't it awful? But then I kind of thought I was being one of these real sort of ridiculous ideological people that were just making things up. And when I looked into it, and I tell you what, I read I don't know if you've ever read it, the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health. An amazing, amazing book that completely changed how I work with boys and men. That I started to kind of question myself based on something I'd read, things I'd seen online. And I thought, maybe masculinity can be good. And there was this inner critic in my head going, no, Phil, you can't say that. That's bad. That's terrible. That's an awful thing. Masculinity is bad and terrible. And men just need to be more open with their emotions. They need to be a little bit more like women. They need to learn more from women and all of that. And when I read the Palgrave Handbook, pointing, because it's on my bookshelf there, when I read the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and read other things, I thought, oh my God, masculinity is not good or bad. It's natural. That's what it is. And despite the fact there were some people that very, very, very critical of me, but no, it's not. It's sociological. It's learned behavior. Masculinity is learned behavior. And to some degree, I might agree with that. And I can see where they're coming from. But actually, a lot of the science is going, no, masculinity is this. This is how it starts. Testosterone in the body, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of got to the point where rather than me kind of dismissing the science, and just looking at environmental factors, I'm now at a point where actually environmental factors and biological ones both play a part. And it's the balance. And I think I've achieved that balance now through educating myself. So now I'm at the point where masculinity is natural. And whilst when some people use the phrase toxic masculinity, they are absolutely making it clear that they're using that term to say masculinity is toxic.
Yes.
They're completely wrong.
It's
others,
not, yeah. It's
others.
Go ahead. No, it's okay. I was just gonna say it's not. It's framed as though it's trying to say, oh no, some aspects of masculinity are toxic, but it's not actually saying that. It's just saying masculinity is toxic. So yeah, it's anti-masculine, and I can understand like why a lot of people would buy into it at first. Because I think that there's a lot of confusion over the difference between masculinity, as just a natural part of being male, and like something that is used to sort of like strawman masculinity, which is like a caricature or a parody of machismo, which is different, right? Like there are men who go over the top and they really try to sell how manly they are, and it's probably a little detrimental, but that's not masculinity, right? That's just a guy like aping masculinity. He's trying to present something, and I think and the thing is, I have sympathy for those guys because I know that what they're trying to do, again, like I said before, they're grasping at something they don't really understand, but they know they want it. So they want to be good men. Like most men want to be good men, and good men are in tune with their masculine self. But it's not as complicated as a lot of people try to make it out to be. It doesn't mean like I knew a guy I met a guy at an international conference on men's issues a few years ago who is a masculinities professor in Oxford, I think. So he's in the UK, and he was doing a presentation where he was trying to show us that, according to data, that men are becoming less masculine. And he was presenting it though it was a good thing. So he bought into the toxic masculinity stuff, right? And he was telling us that men have become like, more less toxically masculine because, more men are holding hands and they're like hugging each other. There's more like physical, contact and things like this. And I thought it was a really strange, I think the whole framing of, the more feminine you act, the better a man you are, is a little ridiculous, because it doesn't make sense, right? And because it suggests that right off the bat, like, these things are firstly not masculine. So, holding hands with a guy, for example. But it also, like, it doesn't make sense, because there is a relationship or a way that men behave which is influenced by the existence of women. So, men don't just do what they want. I mean, like, a lot of the time they do, but they also do what they think women want. So, because men want women in most cases, right? Mm-hmm. So they will behave in a way that they think is going to gain them favor with women. And this is the reason why, again, I don't think it's accurate to simply speak about men's behavior in a vacuum. Because, like, for example, going back to the crime, there are many cases where men commit crimes and of violence against other men at the behest of women. So women will say, would you get that guy? And he'd be more than willing to do it. So, these things don't. And so what do we say? Well, we just say that he's responsible. But she's the one who told him to do it. I'm not saying that she's just as responsible, because ultimately he makes the choice. But the point is that these things don't happen in a vacuum. And so when I spoke to this guy afterwards, and I said, he's telling me, like, all of the studies and that, and he also equated men being more, soft and, like, and more sort of, I don't know how you describe it, but, like, physically, amorous towards other men, even though they're heterosexual. He described that as being less homophobic. So he equated being masculine with being homophobic. And he basically said that they were the same, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I don't know that I agree with that. I think that, just because a man is masculine doesn't mean that he, hates gay men. I don't think that that's enough. If there's a problem with gay men that a man has, it's likely something personal that, we may never learn about. But then I asked him this. I said, you're telling me about, like, how much less homophobia there is now and how that's a great thing, and I'm all for that, but you're also strangely equating it with men behaving more feminine and moving away from their masculine self. And I'm wondering, like, is that push, to get men to be less masculine going to create other problems down the line? And also, what do women think about these studies? I asked him, what have you guys ever interviewed any women to ask them what they think about the idea that men are becoming less masculine and they're instead, more, I guess, feminine? And he said, it's weird. Women didn't like that at all. And I was like, that's not strange, and I'm like, weird at all.
Let's be totally honest here. Women on average will be attracted to a display of masculinity. Mm-hmm. On average, there's nothing wrong with that. It's nature. It's fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think it's about what feels now. I certainly don't describe myself as the most masculine guy in the world. I really don't. But you know what? I would say I have traits of both femininity, masculinity, whatever, and all that. But I think there's nothing wrong with masculinity, and that's the point. And it's about what feels natural. And many boys and men will naturally lean towards behaviors, choices, decisions that link to what we might call natural masculinity. But actually, you've got everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people go, that's bad, that's terrible. Why is it terrible? It's what they are naturally being drawn towards, and it doesn't hurt. It's a bit like the toy debate. So, on average, you look at boys and girls. Your average boy has got a lot more testosterone in him than the average girl. That testosterone doesn't just shape his body, it actually affects his parts of his brain and all of that sort of stuff. And what happens is it's linked to kind of them enjoying shapes, movement, action, all of that sort of stuff. So actually, when a young boy does something or plays with something or finds that actually I naturally enjoy playing with this playing than I do playing with this doll. And that boy's brain will remember that. That will stay there. Then when that boy becomes a teenager and he's choosing his career and so on, there is a chance he might do something involving shapes, movement, planes, whatever. Yeah. None of that is toxic masculinity. It is linked to what you might call natural masculinity, traditional masculinity. Chartered psychologist Martin Seeker calls it archetypal masculinity, which is some, and it's a case of, if that's the natural choice that they have made because it feels good to them, what is wrong with that?
Yeah,
and it's the same the other way. If you've got a boy that thinks, I want to be a dancer and I want to be a makeup artist and all that, and that's my choice, as long if it feels natural, and there is nothing wrong with that. But I think what we often do is hang on, a boy, he wants to be a soldier when he's older, that's toxic masculinity. I've seen people say this. Oh yeah. No, well, let's have a look at that. Let's explore it. And I don't know if you've ever read any of Martin Seeger's work. He's done a lot of work around archetypal masculinity, embodied masculinity. It just makes so much sense. He told me a very good story, so I have to quote him because it's his story, not mine.
Okay.
And he goes, if you give someone a hammer, and I'll never forget this, if you give someone a hammer, you could use that hammer to help build a house. You give someone a hammer, you could use that hammer to hit someone on the head and kill them. It's not the hammer that is toxic, it's the person using it. And it's the same with masculinity. Masculinity is basically just a set of behaviors linked to, archetypal masculinity, the average sort of behavior that your average male displays. It doesn't mean that all men must and should display that. It just means that most men naturally will if you leave them to it. And as long as they're not hurting anyone, what's wrong with that? And if we actually look at the positives masculinity does, such as saving lives, for example, and building civilization and creating technology, the technology that all these misandrists use to say kill all men, then, maybe we should have a bit more of a balance.
Yeah. And I just want to say that I think this is like a common, well, I got to say that I think that because you are out there and you're speaking up for men and you're not afraid of, like whatever resistance you might get, I think that is really masculine. That's kind of what I'm driving at, right? It is, because it's not just like, the physical will to, like, I don't know, just control nature or something, which is sort of a romanticized thing, but just like speaking the truth, regardless of what the consequences might be, because you want to do what's right. I think that is masculine. And I'm not saying women couldn't do it, because I obviously work for women who do, but I think that it's something that men are more prone to doing. So, all right. Well, we've gone for about an hour, but I want to ask you about one more thing, because Allison really wants to know. Okay. What have you seen, or what are some things about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, which I guess you've been following pretty closely, that sort of like, stand out for you in terms of the work that you do and such?
Well, on the first day that Johnny Depp took to the stand, on that day, I had 3 phone calls from 3 men who wanted to inquire about booking some sessions with me. And all 3 of them mentioned Johnny Depp. They said they'd seen him, they heard him. What he had been going through with Amber Heard was very similar to what they had gone through with their ex-partners. And it just prompted them to go, I think I might need to talk to someone about this because I've got some unresolved issues. And all 3 of them basically said in their own words that they would never have made that phone call if they had not have seen Johnny Depp on the stand. And there were other colleagues that I work with or speak to and invest. They had said similar things, that men had emailed and contacted them saying, I've just seen the Johnny Depp thing. It's made me think about what happened to me. Can I book some sessions? So again, I don't know the details of that. It's just the 3 eyes. So it has had an impact. It has had a positive impact on men. Some sadly will go, yeah, but I'm not a millionaire like Johnny Depp. There's no way I would ever be able to take on my abusive ex and win. I'm just going to walk away and try and, so there is that. And yes, he has got lots of money, and I think sometimes that's what we need. But it has, I think one of the interesting things with that is, and everyone's got different views on it. The fact that it was televised, we all saw it. We all saw what was going on. And I wonder if it hadn't have been televised, what would the spin? Could there have been a spin put on it?
Oh, absolutely.
I think so
Or
too.
there would have simply been a lack of reporting. Like like with some, like for example, Harvey Weinstein was recently granted an appeal so that he can make a stronger case because of I guess the assumption is that there were so many women making allegations that were not in fact supposed to be witnesses or whatever, that his lawyers fought and got him an appeal, and they're going to do that whole thing over. And I think that I only found it on one website, and so I was like, well, why wouldn't they report on this? Because I would like to know the truth, but I think it really comes down to, like, how bad does this make us look after everything that we've done? Because Amber Heard, she's not just Johnny Depp's ex. She was the face of the Me Too movement, and I think this is the reason why there was so much media spin behind it and everything, because it's ultimately political, and that's why there's so little concern for the truth from the media, and they're still protecting her, right? They're still protecting her, and I think it has more to do with that. So what else have you noticed? Anything else? Like, so you got some calls, anything about, like, Johnny's behavior on the stand, or his body language that you
Well, I suppose I have to be careful what I say. I'm not a body language expert, so
Yeah.
I don't want to mislead anyone or be inaccurate here. But I think the thing with me is that I watched. I won't say everything. I watched the vast majority of it, because there was hours and hours of it, and we all had lives and work and things. But
Yeah.
but I think for me it was just very. I like to think that I am a very logical person. I'm not always. Sometimes there's a time to be very emotional. Sometimes there's a time to be very logical. Sometimes a balance of both. When you are going through a legal process, I would argue that you need more logic than emotion. And I just think, a few things where you contradict yourself, okay. Few things don't. But there was just an abundance of examples where there was contradictory information, just stuff that was so hard to believe from Amber Heard's side. And you just look at I think you could see in some videos the faces on the jurors who were there.
Yeah.
And and we were hearing what was going on here. And I think that the most powerful, well, there was lots of key bits, but the most powerful thing that stood out to me, there's two things. One, where I think it was Camille Vasquez someone said to Johnny Depp, look, she's basically said that you're a man and you were a victim of domestic abuse. What do you have to say to that? And the comment, yes, I was. That was just so simple, but it was so powerful. And I think all of a sudden we've got this rich, wealthy, millionaire actor, Hollywood guy saying, hey, guys, it's okay to say that you are or were a victim of domestic abuse. A lot of guys I work with might struggle with the word victim, as a lot of guys do, but you don't necessarily have to use that word. You can get around it. But it's also about, yeah, you were a victim, but now you're not. That's something you were, but now you are not. Now you're you. And so I think that was quite powerful. And the other thing, again, was, and as far as I'm concerned, this was absolutely an element of misandry. Some people might disagree, where she says, Amber Heard, tell the world, Johnny, tell the world, I, Johnny Depp, I'm a man, and see it's a man, I'm a victim of domestic violence, and see who sides with you, or words to that effect. Now, some Amber Heard supporters have said, she never said that. She never said, I, Johnny Depp, I, a man. She said, Johnny Depp, like, come on, man. She didn't say, she wasn't referencing the fact that he was a man. She was going, come on, man. Now, if you listen to the audio, I might be able to see where these people are coming from. It's hard to see. But the point is, Camille Vasquez put to Amber Heard, she repeated these words, and Camille Vasquez said to Amber Heard, you said, I, Johnny Depp, a man, I'm a victim of domestic abuse too, and see who sides with you. Amber Heard never said, no, I didn't say that. I said, man. I said, come on, man. She could have corrected her at that point and said, I never said a man. She didn't. Right. And I think that's enough for her to say she was referring to the fact that he was a man. As far as I'm concerned, she was saying, let's see who believes you, a rich, powerful man, can be a victim of domestic abuse. And that's the ideology behind it. There are people out there today who actually, Amber Heard could stand up and so Yes, I did. I absolutely was violent towards him. I was, and he deserved it. And he's a man, and he deserved it. There are still people that could see and hear that and go, yeah, but she's still the victim. She's
Yeah, of
still the
course.
victim because he's a rich, powerful man, and a big, rich, powerful man can never be a victim of domestic abuse. That's absolutely rubbish. Whether
Mhm.
you are a wealthy man or a poor man, whether you've got loads of money in the bank or you haven't got any money in the bank, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can still experience violence, abuse, and all of that from your partner, regardless. And the whole ridiculous, rigid ideology that, oh, well, a rich, powerful man cannot be a victim of domestic abuse. Yes, he can. If we haven't just seen that, then I don't know how else we can highlight it.
Yep, exactly. Um, yeah, that's well said. I feel like I was gonna ask something. Oh yeah. Okay, good. I hate it when I forget things. So I get emails and DMs sometimes from guys, from men who want to start some kind of service for men, right? They wanna help them, and I'm wondering, what do you need to start, essentially, like, if you wanted to get into this field and make it bigger and add to the help that men are looking for? Like, do these guys need a special certification? Do they need a certain things like that?
It depends. I think it depends on how they want to do it. So first of all, I'm in England and you guys are over in the States. And so there are different legalities and different expectations, different hoops to jump through, for example. So I don't know enough about the differences between
Sure.
USA and you. But certainly, it depends. If you want to do something official, like set up a service here, I don't know about the States, but here in England, you would probably have to set up as a registered charity, go to the charity commission, set up something there and all that. It also depends how informal you want to be. So once a month, for example, I facilitate an online group for men. And what we do is, and I facilitate it, but I don't join this group as a professional, if you like. I just happen to facilitate, and I'm a man like everyone else. And what we do is we talk about things that have happened in the last month affecting men, what's going on. So we've already spoken about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. We've talked about other things. We talked about the EE advert that kind of had some real misandristic kind of tones to it and all that. But this is just an informal chat where me and a few other men get together on Zoom. We meet once a month, roughly for 2.5 hours, and we chat and talk about it and what are we annoyed about, what's going on here and all that. And it's a chance for us to vent and vent about all the man hating that's out there.
Yeah.
But that's a very informal thing, and I guess anyone could do that, providing they put a bit of thought into it. If they want to do something a little bit more official, it depends on what route they want to go down. Do they need, if they want to do it as a practitioner such as me, then yeah, they would need to have qualifications behind them. But if you're doing it as a man saying, look, I'm a guy, I'm fed up of all this, and I just want to facilitate a group, and let's just be guys together and support each other, then that might be a way of moving forward as well. Because that's kind of what I've done.
Yeah, that's good. So it's pretty easy to just get started. I mean, I'm in a couple of groups myself, and I think that one of the things that is really important is that men congregate with other men, and maybe men that have had similar experiences or are professionals. I think that's a good idea. So that was one of the other questions I wanted to ask, and then I got a super chat from Egregious Charles, who gives us $5 and says, in UK law, rape requires a male organ. So, of course, by that standard, rapists are all men. So yeah. That actually is the same thing was true in the United States up until like 2013, when essentially like they changed the language, because before it was literally like a man does this to a woman and that's the definition of rape. But that means that if women rape men, then it doesn't count. So
so over here, the University of Lancaster did some research. There was a pilot study, I think, and then there was the final report. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was about the lived experiences of men forced to penetrate. And so if anyone listening wants to just go to Google, type in the University of Lancaster, UK, forced to penetrate research. It was by, I believe, Siobhan Weir and colleagues, and it looks about men who have been forced to penetrate a partner, that how legally under our law here it can't be called rape, because in order for rape to be applicable it has to be perpetrated by a penis. And so it gets, and so Siobhan and colleagues within the report are making a case saying we should amend rape so actually it can be reworded and perpetrated by men and women. Again, fairness, equality, and so on. Very interestingly, on that note, so over here we have the Crime in England and Wales survey, which comes out every few years, and we ask sort of sexual offences and things like that. What's really interesting is the Crime in England and Wales survey does not ask the specific question, have you ever been forced to penetrate someone? It does not ask that question. However, I know that in America, the CDC, within their National Intimate Partner Violence Survey, I think it's called, they do ask that question. They do ask the question, have you ever been forced to penetrate? And actually, loads of men, loads, like over 1 million. And if you look at the data from 2012, I think it is, don't quote me on that year, I might have got it wrong. In 2012, findings from the CDC said there are more men who have disclosed that they have been forced to penetrate compared to than women who have said they've been raped. Now, again, women being raped, men being raped, men being forced to penetrate, all that, it's not a competition. And I really don't think we should make it one. There's too many people doing that. But what we should be saying is, yeah, it's horrible that this is happening to women and it needs addressing. And now men are saying this is happening to me as well, and I'm being forced to penetrate. That needs addressing as well. And maybe over here in the UK, the Crime in England and Wales survey could learn something from the CDC and ask the specific question, have you ever been forced to penetrate? And the findings may be interesting.
Yeah. All right. I got one more super chat here. Thank you for that, Charles, by the way. From Albert Ada Retro, gives us $10 Canadian, and he says, does Phil know the story about the Russian hairdresser holding the burglar prisoner and raping him for 48 hours? This is kind of an old story. So
no, I don't.
Yeah, there was a supposedly, because I mean, I've seen some reports say that it might not be real, but because it's a little too wild. But there was this burglar that broke into this woman's hairdressing shop, and she caught him and took him prisoner and forced him to stay in her basement, and he raped her for like 2 days or something, or she raped him for like 2 days. Pretty messed up, but yeah. So you haven't heard about it? All right.
No, I haven't. I've heard similar stories over here, very similar, but not exactly. Again, I don't know how true they are or not.
And
there's nothing validating them. But I understand
that. And then he says, also, does he think the flick scene from Thor mocks male victims of sexual assault? So there is this movie that came out like a little while ago called Thor: Love and Thunder. It's a sequel to other Marvel movies, and in the trailer for it, there's a scene where the main character is, wearing clothes, and he's in front of like the Olympian gods, and Zeus uses his magic to like take his clothes off, and he just stripped him in front of everyone, right? And so like Albert's wondering if you've seen that, and if you have, do you think that is something that is made to mock male victims of sexual assault? It's essentially stripping someone without their consent, essentially.
I haven't seen it. I'm not familiar with it, and I wouldn't want to give too much of a comment without seeing it. But I think that the history shows us that there are plenty of examples of abused men, physically abused men, sexually abused men, being mocked. There are, just look at the Roman days, look at, what happened years ago, men who were beaten by their wives, they were paraded in streets and mocked, or, any sitcom, any soap opera, what you see all of these things. And it's the case of actually, so when a man is abused, hit, all that, when he gets, it is laughed, it is mocked at. I think we're better, because certainly over here in the UK, there have been a few storylines in the last few years where men who have experienced sexual abuse, rape, it's been dealt with sensitively and seriously and so on, which is absolutely right. But there are still examples, too many in my view, of characters in shows where they are sexually abused, physically abused, or both, and it's laughed and mocked at. And often all we have to do is say, swap the genders. Swap the genders. What would you think then? There was a case, not a case, sorry, there was a show over here a few years ago. I can't remember what it was. It was one of these, I can't stand these reality TV shows. They really get on my nerves. But it was one of these reality TV shows where everyone on it is absolutely ridiculously young and good looking and so on. And it was all set in sort of Roman times, all fake and everything. And you had these good looking women having to partner with these good looking men. And what happened was the men had to strip totally naked. The men had to strip totally naked and line in stand in a row. The women had to forage through the sand to find the clothes to put on the men. Now, some would say that's misogyny because you're making the women rifle through the sand and so on and all of that. Hardly anyone mentioned anything about these men that stood there totally naked and so on. Now, people have said, yes, but they've chosen to go on this show, which they have. They've chosen to take part in this, which I guess they had. How much they knew about having to stand there naked, I don't know. I mean, I think some of them seem to, there's a bravado showing off. But the point is, would you be outraged if it was the other way around? Yeah. If it was a load of women stood completely naked, and the men had to, and it's the case of you're okay, when men are in this position, but not women. And it's this, well, men feel like this, women feel like this. No, women and men are not this homogenous group that all feel the same. We are all unique and so on. And so I think, coming back to this this person's point of view, there is the whole anything. Go on TV today, and I guarantee you, between now and when you go to bed, you will watch a sitcom and you will see something that shows a woman joking about abusing a man or hitting him, and it'll be all for comedy. Over here, we've had a few examples that come immediately to mind. There was a case of there was a guy, I can't remember his name. He's in a band where he plays the bagpipes, and he's sort of authentic Scottish. So he has the kilt on. Yep. Loads of examples, and women grope them, touch them, and he goes, "What if I was a, And then there was a bouncer in Surrey, somewhere down south in England. He's a bouncer, and he says that I get groped at least God knows how many times a night by all these women. They think it's okay, they think it's fun. If it the other way around, and it's the case of I'm not scared, and I don't see myself as a victim, but I'm angry at the double standard. And that's
I've heard about basically kilts are like a magnet. I don't know why, but women just feel entitled to grope men if they're wearing kilts. Okay. So Albert Nader Retro also gives us another $5 Canadian, says the Russian story might be fake, but way too many people think it's funny. All right. Thank you for the super chats. Personally, when it comes to the humor stuff, I'm a little on the fence, because on the one hand, I think that like the double standard is frustrating and I don't support it. And I do think that we shouldn't be making light of abuse. But on the other hand, I think that we all should be like a little bit more willing to laugh at humor. So, because I don't want to live in a world where right now, we live in a world where we can't joke about women. Right? So that means that comedy is already just cut in half right there. And I don't want to live in a world where we can't laugh at men also, because then we can't laugh at anything. So I think that we need humor. It's a pressure release, right? We need to be able to laugh at the human condition, because the human condition is funny. And it's not because we take pleasure in people suffering. It's because it's relatable. Like if I see somebody and they have some unfortunate, accident or something, but we know what we're looking at isn't real. It's not like, some like actual video. It's basically like a slapstick, joke. Then we will all be able to relate, because we've probably been there, where we've done something goofy or whatever. So I would like to live in a world where humor is more normalized than it is now. But we can do that while also being, careful about the things that we joke about. So, okay. Those are my thoughts. Albert Nada gives us another $20 Canadian. Thank you, Albert, and says, I don't have a problem with nudity or even male objectification. I simply have an issue with male abuse being mocked. I don't want to see any abuse being mocked. Let the women have their magic mic. We've got striptease. All right. So anyway, do you have any final thoughts, or tell people where they can find you on the internets?
I guess if people really want to find me, they can find me on Twitter just by Phil Mitchell 83. That's me. That's where they can find me. I guess the sort of final thoughts. Yeah, some good points made. I think humor is very important. I think sometimes it's really interesting. I never thought I'd be saying humor is controversial, but I think in this day and age, sadly, it is. And I think you're right. But I think for me, it's like if we are going to laugh at one group for harmless reasons, perhaps, then again, fairness and equality would say we should also be able to laugh at the other group for harmless reasons. And again, so for me, the humor needs to be fair. And so on, and it's how it's done. But let's be honest, there are certain people in this world who are just sort of on the edge, waiting to be offended at something, and that can be a problem. I think ultimately, hopefully for me, there's something about saying we just need to keep talking. And I think if we just need, as men, if we keep saying we're not having this, we are not having this, from the mild thing of, well, actually, I was on stage in a kilt and someone lifted my kilt and tried to grope me, from, well, actually, my partner regularly hits me on the head with a plate from the kitchen or whatever, whether it's, whether the abuse or the harm we experience as men is minor to major and mild in between, it's a case of it still matters. And, when people often say, oh, your poor feelings as men, I'm like, yeah, just because I'm a man doesn't mean my feelings, my emotional feelings, but also my physical, integrity, it doesn't matter any less than anybody else's. And yes, there are differences, but there are similarities. But hopefully, if men feel able to sort of talk up more and say, this is not okay, I don't like that, and I'm going to challenge you on that, then maybe we can try to have some respectful dialogue where change might be possible.
Yes. And I think that people like you are going to be the ones that are going to lead that, because it does start with just being willing to listen to men. And let's go from there. So all right, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. This was a great conversation. Appreciate you coming on. For those of you guys who are watching, again, links to his website as well as his Twitter are in the description, so go check those out. And don't if you want to, send him an email, just like show him some support, because I think that this is important stuff. And we can't really wait for someone else to do it. I think that we all just got to become a little bit more motivated and self-motivated in particular to talk about these things. All right. So if you guys like this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications so you know when our shows go live. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about what we discussed on the show. And most importantly, please share this video, because sharing is caring. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of the Fireside Chat. Thank you to Phil Mitchell for being our esteemed guest. And we will talk to you all in the next video.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.